I'm Matt at Nexus Baseball, and this is episode 35 of the Tommy John Epidemic. This series is a YouTube read of content from the book Plague of the Gods, an outsider's perspective on baseball's Tommy John epidemic, which is available now on Amazon. I decided to put this content on YouTube to make the material as accessible as possible. This series examines the science behind the most superhuman action the human body can produce, accelerating a baseball up to 100 miles per hour. All of these potential causes of excess valgus stress make up for either poor mobility or small muscle control, or as a cheat to give up safety for velocity. Likewise, all of them are exacerbated by the maximal throwing that is the norm in contemporary baseball. Whenever a person in general is asked to do something more powerfully or something challenging, the first instinct is to flex the greatest number of muscles possible, regardless of their level of actual contribution. This is instinctive as the body overcompensates to bring as much muscle as possible into the activity. A common example of this is the neck muscles flexing as hard as possible with little contribution when lifting a piece of furniture around the house. This protective tension is exactly the opposite of what is required in a low-force, high-speed activity like pitching. It is the same reason why all golf instructors encourage their students to relax and be loose to allow for maximum swing speed. When a pitcher is asked to throw a baseball for the radar gun, or when they're trying to blow away a batter, they will instinctively muscle up and try to throw as hard as possible. This can lead to extra unnecessary muscle recruitment that can be compensated for potentially, but over time will alter the pitcher's mechanics. This is doubly so when strength trainers are developing these same muscles and creating extra tightness and poor movement patterns. Also, while pitching coaches are preaching to get on top of the baseball and pull the ball down. The result is increased effort and increased valgus stress. Compare this to the free and easy motion of pitchers prior to 2000 and is a rather stark contrast. These poor mechanical changes can be compensated for most of the time through practice, but to use another car comparison, the more time you spend at the red line, the more likely something is to fail. Sandy Koufax was aware of the dangers and the attraction of trying to overthrow. Looking back, he is quoted as saying the worst thing for his pitching was always trying for the strikeout by reaching back for a little extra and blowing the batter away with maximum effort. He saw initially that it was effective and repeated it, before eventually changing his approach. Likewise, pitching coach Leo Mazzone of the 1990s Atlanta Braves believed that pitching injuries occurred primarily from muscling up and from overextension. The natural inclination to overexert and to cheat to just a little more velocity has now become every pitch, with both starters and relievers throwing at the red line from the first pitch to counteract ever more powerful hitters. Throwing with the big muscles allows them to do that more easily, but much more dangerously than either progressing naturally or acquiring mobility and proper muscular control through training. Why have these phenomena only been occurring in full force since 2000, resulting in drastic increases in Tommy John procedures? The result from the available evidence seems to be that it coincided with the development and explosion of the travel ball and showcase system, along with the accompanying increases in resistance training in the baseball community. There's always been pressure to be drafted to continue one's career in baseball, but the difficulty was finding a path to explore that possibility. Unless a player was outright a phenom, they would rely on playing well and hoping to be scouted, something that might be quite unlikely for a small town kid in a less competitive region. The travel ball explosion, along with the opportunity to attend showcase events, gave every kid in every town a potential path to be seen. This is incredibly well-intentioned and gave both college programs and professional teams an ever greater pool of talent to draw upon. The unforeseen consequence was both a massive increase in playtime for young arms, as well as the development of an incorrect program for improvement. This program for improvement was the sport training programs presented by thousands of trainers around North America, promising to develop kids' athleticism to make them competitive in the higher levels of the sport. These programs exploded around the turn of the century after the athletics and muscle explosion in sports in the late 1990s. The steroid cheats in baseball, the next generation of football super athletes, and the emergence of visible athleticism, even in sports like golf with Tiger Woods, fueled the impression that bigger and stronger was always better. Meanwhile, the draft bonuses and the pressure to achieve them began to increase significantly, along with the salaries of the baseball players themselves. Coaches train baseball players to be better athletes, which by and large was a benefit and an advantage over the players' peers. From the pitching perspective, more and more pitchers were able to develop velocity by training powerful muscles. As they threw more and they threw harder by developing velocity, often incorrectly, UCL injuries from overuse, fatigue, and improper mechanics, and the law of averages began to mount. The reason that this was not as widespread as it could have been prior to 2010 is that the muscular development programs and associated pitching programs were utilized primarily by fringe candidates at first to develop competitive velocity. Meanwhile, kids that could generate that velocity without the weight programs listened to the traditional coaches to stay away from heavy lifting. They simply didn't need it, and if they were good enough, they got drafted. Pitchers that seemingly can throw harder than everyone else as kids with minimal instruction do so not with powerful muscles but superior muscular coordination and shoulder mobility. Some kids are simply born with more mobility and the ability to control it naturally than others. Therefore, many believe that athletes are born with their capabilities. Just the ability to move and rotate the scapula or shoulder blade with the serratus muscles, levators, and rhomboids, the small muscles, is a key component to get into the positions necessary to generate the arm speed for the pitch. These small muscles in the rotator cuff can then be developed by throwing the baseball properly and developing velocity as the body itself matures. In Little League, when the coach evaluates his players to determine who should pitch, these kids have a clear advantage. They can throw harder and more smoothly than their peers. This is natural selection at its most basic level, as the coach who chooses these kids at such a young age will use them and give them experience in pitching to a greater degree than a child who does not necessarily show such natural aptitude. That is not to say that a child without natural aptitude could not develop the coordination and mobility necessary to pitch at the highest levels. It's just that at every turn of their development, they are given fewer opportunities. By the time kids start developing physically in puberty, they are already often set in positions and are much less likely to move to the mound, as no one by that point is pressuring them to make such moves, unless they are self-motivated and develop those skills themselves. Join me for episode 36 next week. Remember, if you like the content, please like and subscribe. Your support makes this work possible. Also, if you want to jump ahead, please consider picking up the book on Amazon from the link in the description below. See you next week.